Tonight, the first deputy leader of the St. Lucia Labour Party takes the government to task for its parliament postponements and intended borrowing. The government explains the postponement, denying online rumors of trouble within cabinet. And the Police Welfare Association reacts to easing of Leahy law sanctions against the Royal St. Lucia Police Force. The details of these stories and more coming up.
This is the Hot 7 Nightly News with Lovelace and Amy Joseph.
Good night. It is Tuesday, the 22nd of June, 2021. Welcome to the Hot 7 TV Nightly News. I'm Lovely St. Amy Joseph. Thank you for joining us. It is most inappropriate for a government into its sixth year of a 5-year term in office to be going to Parliament to borrow more funds. So says the first deputy leader of the St. Lucia Labour Party, Dr. Ernest Hilaire, who rails against an attempt at last-minute borrowing on the part of government. He further calls out the government for not keeping to its word of holding 4 sessions of Parliament in June to debate its legislative agenda. On Monday, a release from the Clerk of Parliament indicated that the Minister for Finance and Prime Minister would seek approval for the borrowing of €13.5 million from the European Investment Bank. The sitting of Parliament to consider that motion has been postponed. Dr. Ernest Hilaire says candidly, the current government is all over the place with its proposed legislative agenda. He says what was supposed to be a month of sittings to debate proposed legislation has turned into a postponement game. Dr. Hilaire says one thing is for sure, the government is eager to get its hands on more money.
We were informed that there will be 4 sittings of Parliament. Every Tuesday, each Tuesday in June would have been a sitting of the House of Assembly and the Senate. And one was given the impression that the government had a list of legislative bills that they wanted to put before Parliament automatically dissolves or is dissolved by the Prime Minister in early July. So we were certainly looking forward to a very exhaustive, list of activities and items for us to consider in Parliament. Then the first 2 were cancelled or postponed. And of course, for the first sitting, we will provide a bill for the borrowing of money that you stated from the European Investment Bank, €20.5 million. And in our estimation, we thought this is really unusual because there you have a government that is already in the 6th year of a 5-year term. That is already 5 years since we had election. And the government was coming to the ending of its parliamentary period, which, like I said, would end early July. And we certainly did not expect a government that has virtually served out its term to be still engaged in such huge borrowing.
Government has indicated that the borrowed funds will go toward financing emergency operating expenses in the health sector related to the COVID-19 virus pandemic. Dr. Hilaire says the priority should be to give back to the people the power that is theirs to determine how the country moves forward and who will be at the helm of the ship navigating the choppy waters of national COVID-19 response.
This government has been managing the COVID pandemic since March last year, and they feel miserable in how they've managed it. You should not go and proceed to borrow another almost $40 million for the management of COVID. You have served 5 years since the last election. You are coming to the period when the Parliament will dissolve itself if you do not dissolve it. So please have elections and allow the people to decide who they want to continue to manage COVID for them. It may very well be that the St. Lucia Labour Party will win the next general elections, and it's up to them to decide whether they want to borrow almost $40 million. It is highly inappropriate for the government to be doing what they plan to do.
Dr. Hilaire says it is left to be seen whether the session, now scheduled for the 29th of June, will come to fruition.
But I think the fundamental issue now is whether or not all the bills we were supposed to have considered, the first sitting, which was postponed, the second sitting, which was postponed, the first sitting, which was postponed, will it be able to take place at the 4th sitting, which is supposed to be next week, Tuesday? Would we have time for them to complete the legislative agenda? Surely, if the Prime Minister cannot make up his mind as to what is going to happen in Parliament and whether he can manage his team properly, he should call the election.
The opposition says if the sitting is indeed called, its MPs will speak out about the level of borrowing on the part of the government. And while the government has the majority in Parliament and cannot be stopped from borrowing, Dr. Hilaire says citizens will be given a clear picture of the missteps of the administration. An explanation has been provided by the government's senior communications officer regarding the postponement of Tuesday's sitting of Parliament. According to the senior communications officer for the government, Nicole MacDonald, legislation that was to be brought before Parliament on Tuesday, 22nd June, needed more consideration and deliberation. But was the government unaware of the stage of readiness of its proposed legislation before giving the go-ahead to the Clerk of Parliament to put out a statement advising of a sitting on Monday, only to put out another release later that Monday to advise of a postponement? MacDonald says the issue was unavoidable and government is acting out of an abundance of caution.
I mean, these things do happen, Lovely, in the course of conversation, in the course of when you look at what's coming up on the agenda. So, I mean, in terms of the time, I understand your question. However, I don't think it's a major issue. I think the major issue here is that we want to make sure that when we come before Parliament with certain things, that it is in the right form, that all stakeholders and partners are in sufficient agreement. Cabinet met on Monday, and it was the various matters that were down to go before Parliament were discussed, and it was decided that there were certain matters on the agenda that needed further clarification, that needed further discussion, especially with regard to the stakeholders involved. If you notice, a lot of the bills that were down have to do with taxation matters, have to do with our ongoing discussions with partners such as the OECD. There was some clarification that was being sought with regard to a lot of those bills.
Rumors abound that all is not right in the camp of the current government, and talk of dissension by a senior member of cabinet persists. MacDonald rubbishes such claims as propaganda fueled by the opposition and its surrogates.
We do understand that there are a lot of rumors circulating as to Parliament being postponed, and I just want to right away state that a lot of those things are untrue and should not be repeated. For about the past 4 years, we've been battling this fake news era, where in fact persons just say whatever and it's allowed to circulate, especially on social media.
MacDonald could not confirm whether the next sitting of Parliament will be held next Tuesday, the 29th of June, or what bills would be brought before Parliament if it did convene. She says one thing is certain, the government will keep citizens updated. Despite the postponement of the sittings of the House of Assembly and Senate this week, questions are still being raised over the need for government to seek authorization of Parliament to borrow some 13.5 million euros. According to the order paper circulated, the monies were to finance emergency operating expenses in the health sector related to the COVID-19 pandemic. Commentator Richard Peterkin says that while he does not wish to speculate on the need to do it at this point, the terms of the repayment are a step in the right direction.
On the eve of a general election, the St. Lucia Labour Party has cautioned the government against borrowing more money, a sentiment that has been expressed in other quarters of society. Parliament has again postponed its sittings, with the largest item on the order paper being the need to borrow 13.5 million euros from the European Investment Bank. Social commentator Richard Peterkin says that if in fact the government is justified in borrowing money to respond to urgent health-related issues, then they would want the best deal possible.
The European Investment Bank apparently is offering what appears to be a reasonable loan, 20-year, a 4-year grace period, so you don't start to repay until 4 years down the road, an interest rate of between 1.35 and 1.45 per annum, which is very concessional. I wish I could borrow at that. If I could borrow that, I'd be buying property all over the country. But also a floating rate. So in other words, what it's saying is that even though it's not a fixed rate, an aspect of that interest rate may also be the floating rate, which is very concessional. I wish I could borrow at that. If I could borrow that, I'd be buying property all over the country. But also a floating rate. So in other words, what it's saying is that even though it's not a fixed rate, an aspect of that interest rate may also be the floating rate, at the Euro Interbank offered rate and 10 to 120 basis points. So it suggests that as time goes on, the rate could change.
He is, however, concerned about the country's ability to service the loan on top of all of its other loans.
Our ability to service, because now we have a lot of borrowings, and even though it's a 20-year loan and with a low interest rate, our ability to service all the debt we have may become a problem down the road. The purpose, as I say, is to pay operating expenses. So this is not a capital loan. This is a revenue loan, and there doesn't appear to be a fixed stream of income to repay it. So, for example, for the airport there was this exit tax, and that money, which would be money coming in, would be used to pay the loan. This is a case where there's no specific stream of income coming in to repay that loan, so it's coming out of our current revenues. And if we're having a real problem, that could mean having to deal with taxation or some other forms of raising revenue to pay this and other loans, because it's current expenses, it's not capital expenses.
For his part, the country can only wait to see the details when Parliament actually convenes.
I wish I could say I knew what it was going to be used for. I have no idea. I know that the expenses that we're incurring to deal with COVID are enormous, and it may well be that we just basically it's obviously current expenses. It's not a capital expense. It doesn't suggest that, for example, it's going to be used for completion of St. Jude's or anything else like that. But I can only guess. I have no idea. But any borrowing has risks, and these are the things that I imagine that the opposition will bring up when they do debate this bill, and when they try to, make their points as to why we should not be borrowing, or we should not be borrowing now.
Also down for consideration this week with the Intergovernmental Agreement, St. Lucia and the United States of America Amendment, the Income Tax Amendment, and the Land and House Tax Amendment. For the Hot 7 News, Nisha Charles reporting.
Thank you, Nisha. You're watching the Hot 7 TV Nightly News. Stay with us. Still to come. Is the opposition SLP calling for an election that it is not ready for? Election theatrics have begun, with La Panse residents stringing up an effigy, and an accident at Savans Bay leaves 2 injured. That and more after the break.